Hello and welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. This one into the Sagittarius full moon, which this year is on the 14th of June in all the major centres of the world. Please see the screen now for the exact time in those big cities. Now, what I'm going to do first of all is explore what a Sagittarius full moon is about. I'm then going to share a simple birth chart wheel which locates each of the planets as this event occurs. Now, the reason I'm going to do this is because if you're more used to thinking about astrology from a sun sign viewpoint, then I feel that this will be more relatable. But please stay with me, because then I'm going to share the event based on Universal Central Time using a proper birth chart, and the ascendant for that event is actually 23 degrees in Virgo. And that's going to make this particular Sagittarius new moon incredibly complex, because what we're going to have is a grand mutable cross influencing the ascendant in Virgo, the descendant in Pisces, which is going to be conjunct Neptune, and Neptune itself is going to T-square both the position of the Sun in Gemini and the Moon in Sagittarius. I'm then going to explore those other planetary positions and the angles they forge to see which are the most dominant. But this particular event also, in terms of the moon, is conjunct a fixed star called Rasalhague. Sounds like a late night chat host in Holland, doesn't it? Rasalhague. But it's particularly sensitive because that can be about infections, and because Neptune in the sign of Pisces is forging an angle to the ascendant, the Sun and the Moon. They're all very interrelated. So with Mars developing, COVID still hovering in the background, Saturn now in a retrograde, and it's going to go back into a square by the last 10 days of August. I think the potential for things to evolve in not necessarily the way we all want is going to be heightened by this particular event. But then, as always, I'm going to share each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces, and a forecast for each of those for the following 2 weeks, which is the time that this event really is manifesting itself in the most energized of ways. And you can watch these in terms of your sun or your ascendant. So that gives you a bit of a manifesto of how I'm going to present this. If you are new to my channel, thank you so much for joining us. We are a bit of a community. If you'd care to sub, I'd be most grateful. I was really quite unwell for a number of years. I'm nearly at the 100,000 mark in terms of subs, so your support is very appreciated. If you're visiting again and you've already subbed, thank you so much for being with me. And if you would like to ascend above this presentation to embrace more serious astrology, please give me 3 pieces of your birth data of time, date and place, and I can give you a roadmap that you can use to guide you for the rest of your life. And along with that, with my special offer of 30% off a 12-month personal forecast for the next year. Now, these charts are totally individual to each person they're produced for, and they are very, very sincere. So if you would like to take advantage of this, please see the link beneath this video. So let's start off by talking about what a Sagittarius full moon is about. Well, Sagittarius is the 9th zodiac sign. It's obviously ruled by Jupiter, the planet of growth, higher education, justice, travel, borders, and of course Jupiter itself can be very much about optimism and feeling very positive about the potential to improve things. But on the other side of the heavens, we've got the Sun in the sign of Gemini, and that's very much about everyday communications. Can be about technology, you know, those text messages, emails, but also the devices that we're all so dependent on these days, and the actual systems that control of all of this, Wi-Fi and broadband and so on. And of course, in terms of the more traditional understanding of the sign of Gemini, very much to do with our everyday interactions with neighbours, with siblings, and our quick thoughts. Whereas the sign of Sagittarius is very much to do with the potential for our higher thoughts, philosophy, spirituality, the higher truth. So we've got a challenge between the two, the impulsive, rather agile energies of Gemini, and Mercury, the planet that rules Gemini, is now back in that sign after it's gone through its retrograde back into Taurus, which came to an end on the 3rd of June, came out of shadow on the 4th, moved back into Gemini on the 13th of this month. So that's just back into the sign of Gemini. But that Gemini energy, of course, very mercurial. But sometimes it can be sort of saying things without necessarily thinking so much about the deeper meaning. So the moon in Sagittarius is asking us to think about our philosophies, our mode of communication. How important is it to us to honour truth? Because there's so much manipulation around messaging these days. You know, whether it's a political party that has press officers that will want to tightly manage the news agenda, and it can be much more serious, such as in Russia, where there's an alternative reality being managed by the government through fear and through clamping down on anyone who might not think in the way that they want. So it's a complex world that we live in. Everyone can share an opinion whenever they want through Twitter. So what this full moon is asking us to do is really think more about the principle of truth, higher meanings, honour, against just, you know, that desire to have a quick opinion, you know, to quickly react and interact with one another without necessarily thinking about the consequences. Now, on the screen now, you can see the wheel which shows where all the planets are. So there you can see the Sun and Mercury in the sign of Gemini. And Gemini is known as being, of course, the third sign. And then working backwards, we've got Venus, Uranus and the North Node in Taurus. So we've got Venus in its home zone in dignity and Mercury in its home zone also in dignity. Then we've got a further dignified planet because Mars is in its home zone in the sign of Aries, along with Chiron, which it's conjunct with on this event, and also Jupiter, the planet of growth, which we've just been talking about because it's the ruler of Sagittarius. Then working backwards again, we have Neptune, the part of fortune, which can be very helpful and is conjunct Neptune on this event. Then we have Saturn, which is the co-regent of the sign of Aquarius. Aquarius energy is often very different to what you read about in sort of some mags. I feel anyway that Aquarius energy has a duality about it. Can be very much to do with tradition, the past, upholding the old way, but also that Uranian energy is very much about embracing what's new, progressive, the truth in a very frank way. And then we got Pluto right at the top there in the 10th house in Capricorn, been there since 2008, been causing a lot of impact during that time. And then you can see the moon on this particular event in Sagittarius. So that gives you an idea where they are just in terms of the zodiac as a whole. But now I'm sharing on the screen with you the event chart based on Universal Central Time, and my chart is located on Greenwich. Now, other astrologers may produce charts based on Central European time, or if they're based in LA or New York or Sydney, or obviously in Delhi or elsewhere in India, and they will get a different ascendant. So based on this particular event on Universal Central Time in Greenwich, in London, obviously Greenwich is the kind of centre of time, if you like, and you can see that ascendant 23 degrees in Virgo. Absolutely fascinating, because there is the moon 23 degrees in Sagittarius, the sun 23 degrees in Gemini. But look on the other side of the heavens, we have the part of fortune 23 degrees in Pisces, but we have Neptune in the sign of Pisces. So a mutable chart, because the ascendant is mutable, that means it moves, it flexes. The moon, exceptionally mutable in the sign of Sagittarius, which is a very restless sign, which loves freedom. So obviously we want freedom from the ideas that we feel are not to our taste. The sun, of course, in Gemini, very much about those everyday points of view. In this particular chart, it's in the 10th house, and it's pretty close to the 10th house cusp. So the sun's asking us to think very carefully about what we believe, who our news sources are, just how much we go with what we're told. And of course, the sign of Pisces is very mutable too. So we have a mutable ground cross. And the complexity of this is that the ascendant is in a square with the moon. The ascendant squares the midheaven. The ascendant is opposite Neptune on the descendant, which is all about relating. Now, I find that YouTube astrology videos are usually very ascendant centric, whereas the descendant is equally important. It's how we relate. It's how people see us. It's also where we set our boundaries and we compete. So having Neptune on the 7th house, very sensitive, but very hard to maintain our boundaries. So what does this all mean? Particularly with that fixed star, Rasalhague, absolutely conjunct, within 1 degree anyway, the moon. Well, I think the moon squaring Neptune with Rasalhague there does increase the potential for mysticism, but also for infection. And, with this pox thing developing, they say if it jumps into animals, it could start to spread. Whether it will spread as aggressively as COVID did, that's another matter. But it shows another example of the way that we're using the earth as something to suit us rather than understanding the earth must always have primacy over our needs. So the plastic, the chemicals, the fast food, food that's produced in a forced way, whether it's livestock or even if it's through genetic modification, crops. All these things are playing with the earth. So I think, the next couple of weeks after this event can see some spreading, whether it's information, whether it's, some kind of illness, whether it's a universal exhaustion, really. We could see extreme flooding because the sign of Sagittarius is not great around boundaries. It wants to flow and go as it wants. Gemini will have an opinion, whatever anyone thinks. And the ascendant in Virgo is very much about purity, trying to find the best practical and most precise way to run our lives and look after our bodies, the 1st house. Whereas the 7th house, we could find our relationships drain us if we've got someone who's constantly tuning into us but not necessarily considering our needs, and that can actually be a drain. Now I want to pick out a few other influences. Now Saturn, of course, in its retrograde now, through to the 23rd of October, does of course have a bit of a dark reputation, but remember Saturn in Aquarius is about us universally. It's about all of us. It's the collective, and you can see it's in the 6th house, which is about health, also about precision. So we're being asked to perhaps get back into some of those more virtuous habits that we had when COVID first came along. Be aware of just looking after ourselves the best we can, hand washing and all that kind of good stuff. But that's actually in a very positive angle with the sun, a 120 trine, which is very enabling. So where there's strong leadership, the sun in Gemini, which has a clear message, which is not confused, that can actually be good for us all. You can also see that Mars, and I mentioned it earlier, is in its home zone of Aries, but it's conjunct Chiron. So this is very, very good to think about our relationships. But Chiron is where we can be most vulnerable, but where we can give the most to others. So Mars can be a bit impatient. So if a relationship seems to be a bit evasive if we get to know someone, or someone's being reticent to open up. I think Mars can be more rugged and to the point in trying to demand what the reality is. And of course Jupiter is continuing in the sign of Aries, so some complex energies around relating. We could, be victims of deceit, and obviously there's a lot of that goes on because of all the various scams that people try to inflict on us through mobile phones and through email. So just be aware of that. But there's also the potential to set those boundaries, and I think Neptune in that case is saying stay sensitive, stay kind. And this mutable ground cross also says flex, almost be like a giant bubble. We don't necessarily have to take one fixed position. We can take a little bit of ideas coming in and out, Gemini, trying to get the higher truth, Sagittarius, staying free, Sagittarius, but we can, the bubble can go in a bit, but it doesn't need to pop, it doesn't need to fall over. Now, Mercury, right up there in the 9th house, is brilliant because that is actually, although Mercury itself technically is detrimented in the sign of Sagittarius, very 9th house energy, it's home in Gemini, so that's really asking us to cut through and get to what the facts are. So research our facts carefully, and that's in a terrific trine, although it's disassociate, with Pluto. Pluto's in the 5th house of charm, affection, fun, play. Hey, Pluto in those areas. But if we really want to do our research, our due diligence, that combination, though it's a little bit from being exact, a couple of degrees apart, very, very good in that regard. Now you can also see the part of fortune is very close to Neptune, so caring people who are tuned into us can be fortunate for us. Now the other thing I wanted to look at was that Saturn is square the North Node, and the North Node is, if you like, our collective consciousness at this time. And since it moved into to Taurus on the 18th of January, we've had a big reset going on progressively around the cost of energy, the cost of loans, the cost of food, and the cost of petrol and gasoline. So that's a reset, but you can see that Venus is actually very close to the North Node, but a little bit more distant from being in the square with Saturn. So I'm going to take the Saturn square node. That's kind of saying Saturn in Aquarius is asking us to think of how our spending or attitudes towards money or materialism affects us all. That's just my personal view of it. But then you could also see that Venus is in a conjunction with Uranus. So for some lucky people, the next couple of weeks could see a conversation that's very flirty, and someone can be very seductive with all this misty energy around, especially with Neptune so powerful, along with that fixed star of Rasalhague. And I think that, yeah, there could be, especially because they're in the 8th house, which is very hot and sensual, there could be someone who emerges in your situation who does make your pulse race quite quickly, but it's important to understand if their message is crystal clear and they are totally reliable. So what we're all looking for over this next 2 weeks with this strawberry moon, I think, is clarity. And I think clarity and the higher truth are going to be at a premium, and we need to use all our shrewdness to cut through the sway to find out what is really workable and what's really based on true fact. Now please stay with me, because I'm going to share each of those 12 zodiac signs, which you can listen into in terms of your sun, ascendant, or both. And I will also put a timestamp underneath this video where you can go and watch your zodiac forecast if you would like. Now, for Aries, I think that this event is very much in keeping with how it is for most of us, to be honest. You know, the sun is in the 3rd house, and obviously the moon's in the 9th in terms of the overall zodiac. But let's think about the fact that you have got Mars and Jupiter in your sign, so they're giving you a lot of thrust. But with Neptune, part of fortune, tucked up in your 12th house in Pisces, I think that's a little bit of a clue. So the clue is listening to your instincts, but also then going and doing your due diligence. And what will help you more than anything, above all the other zodiac signs really, is Mercury being in that very practical trine with Pluto, because Pluto can be about secrets, can be about power, can be about leverage, and it can be about dark power as well. Whereas Mercury in the ninth house is really demanding to get very much through, penetrate through, right to the nub of any matter. So that can help you if you're feeling a bit unsure or not quite clear about a contract or where someone's coming from if they communicate with you. Listen to your hunches, but then get very factual. That's how you're going to deal with this next 2 weeks to the best effect. Which brings us to Taurus. Now for you, Taurus, the event occurs in house 8, which is your longer term finances, and the sun is in house 6. So balancing the books. And of course, with Neptune in the mix, and that's a very distorting influence in your 11th house. Is there a friend? The 11th house is very much to do with our connections to others. Is there somebody that you really like, but you're not quite sure whether they are a sort of a fair weather friend of that variety? Because with Chiron, Mars and Jupiter all in the 12th house, you can have a connection at this time with people from your past. Or it could be that you're feeling some evocative energies. Maybe old skills and talents can be repositioned and recalibrated in the present to make use of the experiences you've gained over a period of time that can push back a bit against some of the increases in costs, or if your job situation has changed. But I feel that you should be very realistic. Don't be idealistic. If someone tries to, for example, really excite you about a get-rich-quick scheme, or some kind of multi-level marketing scheme, that's not to say that there are some multi-level marketing schemes to do with natural products and cosmetics that I think are actually pretty good products, and they're not necessarily evil in any way. But sometimes people will tell you, well, if you buy this stock, you'll get money from the next person, and of course it's not necessarily easy, because the person up the chain may not be as motivated as you. So just watch out for those kind of blurry messages that sound good on paper but can have a bit of a catch. Now in a romantic context, the second 8th house influence is asking you, if you're in a relationship, whether you and your partner really have unified values. Because in my experience, particularly with astrology, it doesn't matter if you come from slightly different backgrounds, but if you have very similar values, that's a real great thing to have. So this full moon could bring into the open a difference around that over the next 2 weeks. Now Gemini, for you, of course, the event is opposite your sun. So it's possible that somebody close to you feels that you're being a little bit too focused on what you want to do with your career. And because you've got such a wonderful set of energies in your 11th house, your enthusiasm to connect with other people recently has been extraordinary. And also, of course, you've got the planet of healing, Neptune, in your 10th house of work, along with the part of fortunes. So what do we make of all of this? Well, I feel that if someone does challenge you about your single-mindedness, try to be receptive to what they have to say. You can often dazzle people. You're like an old-fashioned Welsh wizard rugby winger, swivel of the hips and you're off. No one can pin you down, because you are, quite simply, the most mercurial of all the signs. But if someone is very seriously asking you to be more mindful of their needs, try to hear it out, because I think it will actually be potentially very positive for you to do so. Which brings us to Cancer. Now for you, the sun's in house 12, and so that's quite a complex place, and the moon's in 6. So 6 is about the physical world, cleanliness, hygiene, practical approaches, and the sun is in the 12th house of psychology. But because you've got Neptune in the 9th house, which is very much to do with expansion, because of that Jupiterian energy, which also governs the sign of Pisces, It's possible that if you do have any worries going on over the next couple of weeks, they can almost take on a life force of their own. But you know, you've got an ace in the pack in terms of your situation, because having Mars and Jupiter in your 10th house can really help you to showcase your authority and your natural leadership skills. But I feel it's possible that you could feel a little bit sensitive over the next couple of weeks, or more sensitive than usual. And there may be times when you just need to draw back a little bit. But certainly with that whole collective, really, the North Node, Venus and Uranus in your 11th house of friendships, and Mars and Jupiter in your 10th house of success, they're really asking you to sort of be out there, bigging yourself up. But I feel that you may just need to rebalance any slight misalignment between your physical and practical reality and your emotional needs, because, you know, are you ignoring them in some kind of subtle way? Are you, you know, not wanting to look at something that's quite painful, which is quite a Cancerian approach? You know, you sort of really hunker down, don't really reveal too much of what you're feeling, but sometimes it's all, you know, there working away inside of you. So not a bad idea to ventilate. And Neptune in the 9th house would be very good to talk to someone who's very kindly and understanding, who might be able to provide some healing, perhaps even in a practical way to you, through a nice massage or some other form of alternative medicine. Saying that, getting by the sea, getting by a lake or a river would also be tremendously healing for you over this next fortnight. Which brings us to Leo. Now for you, Leo, you're often one of the most popular of people in the zodiac, and often needing to keep all of the people happy all of the time. So that's not a new experience for you. Could be some more of that over the next couple of weeks. But also, because Mars and Jupiter are in your 9th house of travel, if you can get away with it, get away from it all and do something more spontaneous, and even go and see a different group of friends, or, you know, just get off the beaten track. Because one of the things about you is that you are a fixed sign, and you often don't find it easy to instigate things just on your own. There needs to be someone you can work with, and if you are on your own, maybe it's been a bit dislocating, particularly through the COVID situation. But with Venus and Uranus in your 10th house, something could develop over the next couple of weeks completely unexpectedly, a financial opportunity that could enable you to use your talents and skills and flair in a much more fulsome way. But because Neptune's in your 8th house of deeper finances, you know, whatever anyone's telling you, really check it out with great care. Which brings us to Virgo. Now, of course, in the event chart, the ascendant's in your sign, but in terms of this particular Sagittarius full moon, the strawberry moon, it's in your 4th house of home and family. So that's good in a way, isn't it? Because the moon is about the 4th house, very Cancerian, very much about protecting ourselves and being secure and nurture. But the sun in the 10th house, along with Mercury, your ruler, they're asking you to really raise your profile. Also, Venus and Uranus in your 9th house, especially Uranus, has been pushing you to change something and be much more daring. And then the thrust of Mars and Jupiter in the 8th house, it can have more of an impact in terms of your desire, because Mars is about instant gratification. Jupiter knows no bounds, and Mars is about risk. So those two together in your 8th house could see you wanting to be more entrepreneurial, or it could translate more in terms of your relationship world. Perhaps the desire for intimacy is going to really ramp up over the next couple of weeks. But if your life is a case of all work and no play at the moment, I think the very beguiling influence of Neptune in your 7th house tells you, if you do get away from it all and just spend time with someone who's very calm and peaceful to be around, but at the same time, you know, has a bite of excitement somehow about them, you'd be really marshalling your energies perfectly over the next 2 weeks. This brings us to Libra. Now Libra, for you, the moon's in the third house. Now the moon in the third house is like having it in Gemini, so you can find it, because of the air quality of Gemini, hard to actually get into the feelings, because it's much easier to work through the prism of the intellect. But of course that's you as well, an air sign, so you're used to that. So the third house, ninth house, is almost like the reverse of this event for Aries. So for you, your everyday communications governed by the moon could promote a little bit of subjectivity, but having the sun in the ninth house along with Mercury now is really pushing you to have some kind of change. If someone close to you is resisting that, then that could be frustrating over the next couple of weeks. But equally, Neptune's in your sixth house of obligations. You probably don't want to let anyone down, even if you get an instant desire to break out. But then Mars and Jupiter and Chiron in your seventh house are saying, no, you want to engage with some kind of contact, some kind of challenge, whether it's a sporting challenge, one at work, taking on a role that requires you to be much more competitive, or perhaps, in your romantic dimension, all this communicational energy could give you the desire to, reach out to someone perhaps through a dating app, or if there's someone that you kind of know a little bit, ask them out on a date, because Mars and Jupiter in your seventh house are emboldening you. You're often the person that's very attuned to the energies of others. Now you want people to be much more attuned to your energy. And also your ruler Venus is conjunct Uranus in a very dramatic area. That could lead to a sudden financial gain over the next couple of weeks. It could be linked to somebody you're already involved with, or a business you're involved with. Could be a cost, but then again there could be a bit of a fling, and it may be a fling, but actually you may think, I'm up for that, because it's a very exciting, provocative combination between your ruler and Uranus, pushing you to be a bit naughty, Libra. What will you do? Will you have the conversations and play it safe, or are you going to bring some drama to your situation? Over to you. Scorpio. Now for you, the moon's in the second house, everyday money, self-worth. The sun in the eighth house, your longer term financial planning, but also the sector of transformations. Now, if you recall from the new moon, which occurred on the 30th of May, you had an opportunity to transform your situation, much in keeping with the energies of your own sign. Now Mercury is in the sign of Gemini. If you are a business person, and especially with Mercury forging a great link with your modern higher octave ruler of Pluto, you can be razor sharp in assessing the opportunities. Also remember the position of Saturn in relation to the Sun. That would be good for a deal around property, but then Neptune being in this complex T-square with the Sun and also the Moon suggests that when it comes to more speculative propositions, because your ruler Mars, traditional ruler Mars, is alongside Jupiter, that could make you in the sixth house want to challenge yourself something, especially if you're dissatisfied with your work, but that could end up costing you a lot of money if you don't get fully informed. So just watch Neptune around the money. Brings us to Sagittarius. So it's all about you, isn't it? So it's relationship, Sagittarius. If there's a relationship which isn't working for you, it's going to become potentially more obvious over the next 2 weeks. And the reason I use the word potentially is simply because the Neptune's in your fourth house of emotion, and it has been causing some mischief for you since 2012. It may have also brought some moments of real magic, particularly about getting into nature, or perhaps you've created a home or a home-based business that's very creative. You know, if you're someone who's a crafter in any way or a maker, you've probably been absolutely inspired. And of course, on this particular event, Mars and your ruler Jupiter are together in the fifth house of creativity and self-expression, but you're wanting people to recognize your talent. So if you've got a partner who's really tuned into you, cares a lot about you, meets your needs, this can be a very positive full moon, I feel. Maybe there's going to be some conversations with people in the family, and there could be the potential for some confusion to develop because of the role of Neptune. So to cut through the swirling mist, very important to make sure that you're very precise in what you say. Now, Capricorn, obviously the position of the moon is very tender for you. It's the 12th house. This is where we can be fearful of people's intentions, can make us a bit insecure, lacking trust. Maybe the challenge could come at work because the Sun and Mercury are in your 6th house, which is to do with, you know, your everyday world, but also to do with the need for order. So I think also with Neptune being in your 3rd house, what you're told is not necessarily what people really are meaning. So being able to decipher the message is going to be the talent for you over the next couple of weeks. But if you have got a desire to make improvements to your home, Mars and Jupiter in that area still very helpful. And with Venus and Uranus in your 5th house, a surprise and mystery admirer can also reveal themselves over the next 2 weeks. Aquarius, for you, the moon's in the 11th house of friendship, the future, but also your higher beliefs. Whereas the sun's in the 5th house, very much to do with, you know, your individual self-expression, your ability to charm, affection, play. You know, maybe a little bit of cost is going out of your coffers at the moment, Aquarius, that you just need to sort of challenge a little bit. If there is a bit of leakage, you know, go through your bank statements and just see if there's some, you know, I've done this recently. You go through and I thought I cancelled that. And it happened with the dentist, to be honest. And they were really good about it and actually gave me some money back. But we can have sort of direct debits or standing orders go in that we forget about. And the dreaminess of Neptune can distort our reality. The 3rd house is words spoken, text message sent. So I feel that you could feel a little bit below par, but there is the potential for, you know, a friend could invite you out. It could be a last minute, completely spontaneous event and actually can have a brilliant time. And you may imbibe. But if you are going to imbibe, just be aware with a 12th house moon, your emotions will be particularly sensitive to the toxins. So that's where I see it. Which brings us to Pisces. Now for you, the moon is high in the sky in the 10th house and the sun is in the 4th house. Work-life balance. It became a little bit of a sort of phrase we pretty well all use. And with all these labour-saving devices, I'm rather fond of saying this, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. We seem to have less time than ever we had before. But, you know, the sun for you is in the 4th house. And there's part of you at the moment, therefore, that's wanting to make sure that that part of your life is working well. But it could be it's going to be more difficult for you to disguise your emotions with this particular full moon because the 10th house makes them more plainly obvious to others. And if you're someone who does like to keep your cosmic cards close to your chest, that can be a bit challenging, particularly with Saturn in your 12th house in retrograde and in a square with the North Node in the 3rd house. So you're picking up sort of almost like subconsciously all these energies, and that can sort of be a bit undermining. So I just feel that, yeah, you know, if you're spending too much time at work and you need to get more time for yourself or need the support structures at home, you know, are all those in place? Are you taking some of those for granted? Are you spending too much time providing support structures for someone else and not following your own muse when it comes to your career possibilities? And generally speaking, with Mars and Jupiter in your 2nd solar house, this can be a time of progress when it comes to your finances and work. But I think self-confidence is the key. But a sudden text message or email can provide a lot of excitement over the next couple of weeks and a lot of delight too.